All right, everyone. So I want to talk to you guys about the movie Session 9. Session 9 is a horror movie that came out in 2001. It stars the Scottish actor Peter Mullen. Peter Mullen is the guy in Braveheart who said before the Battle of Stirling Bridge scene, all right, lads, I'm not dying for these bastards. Let's go home. That's Peter Mullen. So Session 9 is about this Scottish immigrant who lives in the United States, and he runs an asbestos removing business. He is in the business of removing asbestos. Asbestos used to be commonly used in American properties, and then they realized, asbestos is actually really toxic for you, so everyone wanted to get their asbestos removed. And so this Scottish guy gets hired to remove the asbestos in an abandoned, crazy home. All right, so this movie has the perfect setting and environment for a horror movie. So he brings his employees to this abandoned, crazy house, an abandoned insane asylum. And so these guys are walking around this building, and they're walking inside of this building, and they're removing the asbestos, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work because the asbestos is everywhere. Well, one of the employees just so happens to discover a pile of old tape recordings, and he starts listening to them. And these are recordings of a psychoanalysis session between a psychiatrist and a woman who murdered her entire family. And so this employee is listening very intently to these tape recordings. And these tape recordings are really where the movie begins to shine as a true horror movie. These recordings are what make this film creepy. This girl who murdered her entire family has multiple personalities, and the psychiatrist is talking to the personalities in separate conversations. So he talks to one personality, and then he talks to another personality. And he's listening to this employee of this Scottish immigrant is listening to this psychoanalysis session. And the psychiatrist says, all right, I am now speaking to the doll that you own, young lady. So this girl owns this doll, and the doll speaks to her. Now, you never see the doll talking, but it's implied that she communicates with this doll, and it's creepy. It is. I mean, just thinking about it is creepy. And as you're hearing this conversation, the camera in the movie is pointing to a photograph on the wall of the doll. And so you can see the doll, and the psychiatrist is saying, so now I am speaking to the doll. And the girl, who is a mass murderer, is speaking, but the doll is speaking through her. And her voice sounds eerily disturbing. And so these conversations are heard in the movie. And strange things begin to happen to the employees of this asbestos removing business. And one day, the Scottish immigrant, played by Peter Mullen, is talking to one of his employees, and he says, I have to confess something to you. I smacked my wife today. And you think, okay, well, this guy smacked his wife, and that's pretty terrible, and he feels bad about it. And so you think, well, at least the guy feels bad about it. He feels guilty. He feels remorse. And as the film goes on, it becomes very obvious that this guy did not smack his wife. He murdered his wife. What is happening to this Scotsman is that this demonic entity that is lingering inside of this abandoned crazy house has possessed him and is influencing him. And so this demonic influence, this demonic entity is taking control of his mind, taking control of his body. They go back to the crazy house because this is a multi-day project. There is a lot, and I mean a lot, of asbestos that needs to be removed from this crazy house. And as I was watching the movie, I was thinking, I don't know what's scarier, the recordings or the fact that they have to remove all that asbestos. That's a lot of work. That's a real pain in the ass, and just removing all that stuff in such a large building is quite hellish. I mean, if you've done manual labor like installing drywall or installing tile, you'll know that doing stuff like that is very difficult and tedious work. So they go back to the crazy house and they're walking around and they're removing the asbestos, and the employee who found the tape recordings, well, where do you think he goes? He goes right back to the tape recordings. He goes to the tape recordings and he starts listening to more of these conversations. He starts listening to more of this psychoanalysis session. This is no Jordan Peterson lecture. I mean, this is some serious and dark dialogue with a murderer who is influenced by the very dark entity that has possessed the Scotsman. So this employee is listening to one of these recordings, and in this particular recording, the psychiatrist is talking to the personality that convinced this young lady to murder her family. And this voice comes out of the girl's mouth, just like the voice of the doll. And this voice is nothing like the girl's voice, and there is nothing feminine with this voice. This voice sounds extremely devious and sadistic and insidious. The voice sounds something to the likes of, "Hello there." I mean, it's dark. When I first heard the voice, when I saw this movie, it just sent a chill down my spine. This voice is talking to this psychiatrist. This demon really is speaking through this girl to this psychiatrist, and you're listening to this conversation. It's very dark. It's very disturbing. And this is where the horror element of the movie really shines. The psychiatrist asks this evil entity, "Where do you reside? Where do you live?" And this evil entity says, "I live inside of the weak and the wounded." And it is a very impactful line in the movie. This movie is very well done. It came out in 2001, and for a horror movie that came out in 2001, it is much better than most of the horror films that I've seen in my life. If I had to make a top 10 list of the best horror movies, in my opinion, Session 9 would definitely be on the list. It is one of the best horror movies that I've ever seen. It is very atmospheric. The acting is quite good. I do enjoy the acting of Peter Mullen, especially given the fact that Braveheart is my favorite movie, so I do recognize his face. It's a dark movie, but it's very well done as a horror movie. Horror movies, as I have said many times, to me, good horror movies, not bullshit horror movies, but good horror movies, films like The Exorcist or Hereditary. Good horror movies are artistic representations of the reality of evil. And I've used this example many times, but you can look at paintings showing, or you can look at paintings depicting battles from the 30 Years' War, or just certain dark events from the 30 Years' War. And if you look at these paintings, they're grim, the texture is very moribund and gloomy, and they are depictions of reality. They are reflections of reality. It's like when you look at old Renaissance paintings, and a lot of Renaissance art is very dark. You know, we like to think of the Renaissance as an era of great inspiration for human intellect and logic, but a lot of Renaissance artwork and even Renaissance music can be very dark. You can see these Renaissance paintings, for example, that show war and famine and plague, and these paintings are very dark. And there are certain characteristics of a dark painting. The texture is gloomy and dim, and of course, what is being depicted is quite eerie and scary and disturbing. but there is a certain vibe that comes from a painting depicting something that is tragic. So the same thing can be applied to horror movies. A good horror movie is going to have the texture that conveys a vibe of gloominess and ominousness and scariness and something disturbing. A great example of this is the movie The Witch. When you watch the 2015 film The Witch, which is, in my opinion, one of the best horror movies ever made, if I had to make a top 10 list of the best horror movies, The Witch would definitely have a position in that list. But when you watch that movie, the texture of The Witch is very fitting to the story, much like how when you watch Saving Private Ryan, the texture of the movie, and by texture I'm talking about the color, the lighting, the way, the tint of the camera, the tint of the screen, all of these elements are very fitting for the story of Saving Private Ryan. And I think you could even classify Saving Private Ryan as a horror movie. I mean, it is a horrific movie, a very horrific movie. When you look at a movie, the texture, a good movie is going to have a texture that fits the story, the environment. A good movie is going to have the vibe that fits the story. And so when you watch Session 9, the texture of the film is fitting. It has a good texture, and it just has that vibe that fits with the story. Now, I first saw a little bit of Session 9 when I was very young. I was about 10 or 11 years old, and I remember watching TV back in the day when people watched TV. We don't really watch TV anymore. We watch the internet, which to a great extent is better than television because we can use ad blockers and not have to watch commercials. But the first time that I saw a scene from Session 9, I was about 10 or 11 years old, and I was watching the TV, and I was watching HBO. I remember I was watching this scene, and in this scene, some guy inserts something into somebody's eyeball. And my mom came in and she said, "Hey, let's watch something else." Years and years later, we're talking like in the year 2020, that memory got triggered in my head. And I thought to myself, what was that movie that I was watching and that my mom didn't want me to watch anymore? So I went into Google and I described the scene in the Google search bar. I found the movie, Session 9, and I said, okay, I'm going to watch it. So I watched the movie at its completion, and sure enough, it was indeed the movie that I remember seeing from the time that I was very young. But here's the thing about Session 9. You don't see any monsters in Session 9. You don't see the boogeyman. You don't see the demon. You don't. You hear the monster, and you hear the demon gloating about what he gets people to do, boasting about the evils that he convinces people to do. And what makes the film creepy is the voices that you hear in these recordings, but also what these voices are saying and the evils that this entity got this girl to do and what this entity got this Scotsman to do. Look at all of the evils that people do to each other. Look at all of the horrors that you can read about in history or in our own time. Look at what's been going on in Sudan. Hundreds of thousands of people massacred, people starved, millions of people facing starvation, millions of people displaced. And you see these Sudanese paramilitaries or these Sudanese paramilitary fighters boasting about how they murder people. And there is the most famous of the most famous of these paramilitary murderers, members of the paramilitary organization, the RSF, or the Rapid Support Forces, which is being backed by the UAE because the RSF gives gold to the UAE. But the most famous RSF murderer, I don't want to call them fighters, they're fighters, oh yeah, real combatants. The most famous of these RSF murderers and rapists is a guy who calls himself Lulu or Abu Lulu or something like that. And this guy is a demon in the flesh. And there is a recording that you can listen to where Lulu, or whatever his name is talking about how he had a goal. He set a goal for himself for how many people he wanted to murder. That's the goal that he set up for himself. And he said, my goal was to murder 2,000 people. He said, but I've killed so many people that I've lost count. And now I wish I could go back so I could count from the beginning so I could actually get an actual number of how many people that I killed. And this guy is obviously demonic. This guy he is what the Bible would call a child of Belial or a son of Belial. And he boasts about his evil, and he has zero remorse. Some people, a lot of people, I would say most people, generally speaking, when they do something bad, I'm not talking about murder, but when they do something in the heat of the moment, right? They say something they shouldn't have said. They do something that they shouldn't have done in the heat of the moment. I'm not talking about serious crimes. I'm talking about just the sins of the general population. They feel bad about it, right? They have a sense of remorse. I said something I shouldn't have said. Maybe it's a kid and maybe he steals some candy or something and he feels bad about it, right? You feel bad. And that remorse, that sense of feeling bad about something that you have done, that comes from God. That's part of being human, right? God put that in us. The Bible talks about a set of laws that are eternal, that are written on our hearts, that are built in us. Like, we know when we've done wrong. And that's a good thing, right? That's good that we have this sense of awareness when we have done wrong. And we try to make up for it. And we try to do the right thing. And we try to find redemption. That's what makes us human. That's what separates us from the animals. Animals do bad things. They'll steal food from each other. They'll attack each other. I mean, you see cats doing this all the time. Dogs will do this as well. Dogs don't give a shit. Dogs will steal food from other dogs and not give a damn. They don't care. What makes us human is our ability to have remorse, to say, I've done wrong. Even, you have these atheists who sit here and talk about how, it's biologically we're hardwired to this survivalist mode of survival of the fittest, and the fittest that, and the fittest this, and that's the animal world. And they want us to act like animals. That's why they teach that sort of thing. They want us to act like animals. Animals are ruthless. Cats, as cute as they are, cats are ruthless. Cats will see food that they want, and they'll smack the cat that's eating the food, and they'll take the food. They don't give a damn, and they will eat all the food, and they will sleep very soundly the next moment. They don't give a damn because they're cats. They're animals. But with humans, we have this ability to have remorse. We have this capacity to be aware when we've done wrong. We have this ability to know right from wrong, good versus evil. And what the devil wants is for us to disintegrate this element within us, this eternal element within us. He wants us to burn our conscience and think nothing of it, and to even feel good when we do wrong, and to boast about our evils. We human beings are made with, for lack of better words, an eternal element, or there is an eternal dimension within us. We understand when we do evil because we know good versus evil, because we know right from wrong. When we do wrong with evil intentions, and when we do wrong under the influence of the diabolical, we mimic the devil. And that's why people who are evil will boast about the evils they do. St. Paul says that we are a little bit less than angels. We're a little bit under the angels when it comes to our design. Angels are purely eternal. We have an eternal soul, or you could say spirit, but at the same time, we are cloaked with flesh. So we're a little bit less than the angels. But nonetheless, there is an eternal dimension within us. So the angels were all created, and the angels were given a choice between following God and following the devil. And you had angels who decided to follow the devil. We call those demons, and those demons are eternal. They're eternal. They can't be destroyed. Angels are eternal. They can't be destroyed. And because we have an eternal element within us that is similar to angels, we also can make that choice to follow God or follow the devil. But because we have an understanding of evil, When we decide, when we make that intention to do great evil, horrendous evil, we have stepped into the diabolical. I'm not talking about general sins here. I'm talking about real, serious evil. I'm talking about Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm talking about Canaanite human sacrifice. I'm talking about Aztec blood-drinking human sacrifice. I'm talking about that level of evil. When people, I don't want to say we, because I'm not talking about myself, and I'm not talking about the general population, but when people decide to make that step towards the diabolical, they have shown who their father is. And like their father, they boast about their evil, and they love it. But going back to Session 9 is about that diabolical influence. Session 9 is about what these dark entities do, how they're proud of what they do, how they influence people. And yes, it is a fictional story. Yes, it is a movie. But it is, like a painting, a work of art that reflects the reality of evil. And that evil, that reality of evil, that evil that you see in Sudan, where these murderers gloat and boast about the evils they do, that evil that you see, for example, in Israel, where you have IDF guys boasting about killing civilians, or when you see Israelis defending IDF soldiers who sodomized a Palestinian detainee, and they're protecting these soldiers, or they're praising these sodomizers. It's the evil that you see in Mexico, where cartels will chop people up and think nothing of it, and they will literally partake in voodoo rituals or Santeria or Palo Mayombe rituals, and this actually happens in Mexico, but they will actually kidnap children and sacrifice children to the demons that they follow. The films, they reflect this reality. And we essentially are living in one giant horror movie, except it's real. And that, my friends, is scarier than any horror movie, truly. Anyway, guys, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.